You know what's interesting is Rush used to call it an echo chamber. Things that we say here often do wind up into the broader narrative. Despite the fact that you have individuals who claim that they thought these things up or whatever, it's okay. This whole Eighth Amendment issue, which I'll explain again because things can get complicated. But over the weekend, a buddy of mine for how many years now? Wow, 44 years. 43 years. I started out in the Reagan administration, almost right after law school when I was 23. This gentleman and I, Arthur Ferguson, we met each other in the Reagan administration, became fast friends, and have been for decades. I'm a constitutionalist. He's a constitutionalist. So I contacted him over the weekend, and I said, look, what they've done to Trump here has violated his constitutional rights, and we got to hone in on exactly which right it violated, because you can't throw a 60-yard pass. It's got to be something that's substantive and something that can, in fact, be applied to the law and the fact patterns in the case with Letitia James and the fraudulent judge. So we went back and forth to some extent. And we fell on the Eighth Amendment. Now, why did we do that? Again, we went back and forth, and I said to Arthur, you need to write this up. First of all, I don't have time, but you need to write this up. Nice short piece. I'll send it over to Fox Digital, which is where he wanted it to appear. And there were a lot of law professors. Steve Calabrese, a brilliant guy who I also worked with at the Justice Department, and Jonathan Turley, who's also brilliant, at George Washington Law School. They're very, very good men, but I thought they were missing the mark. This isn't in any respect to put down. People are trying to figure out how to address what's taking place here. So Arthur's piece focused on the Eighth Amendment. Why the Eighth Amendment? Most people don't even read the Eighth Amendment. But this is what I do. And when I ask my friends, this is what they do. Craig Bannister over at CNS News, he got it right. President Trump has an Eighth Amendment challenge to the unconstitutional fines levied against him by a rogue judge, constitutional scholar Mark Levin noted Tuesday, commenting on the extraordinary $370 million fine with interest imposed by a New York judge. Later that day, former President Trump posted the text of the Eighth Amendment on Truth Social platform, later linking to the same article linked by Levin in his comment posted on X, formerly Twitter. The text of the Eighth Amendment, this aspect is quite simple. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Now, let me stop there. Why do you think the Constitution has this Eighth Amendment among its Bill of Rights? As you know, the Bill of Rights were added after the Constitution was ratified as a promise to the state legislatures and conventions that the new national government would circle back and address some of the concerns the states had, and the states were going to vote against the Constitution without the assurances. And so these 10 amendments are amendments that were basically demanded by the states. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Why would the states want this? Because hundreds and hundreds of years ago, this is exactly what the English monarchy did to people it was trying to destroy, opponents of the crown. The crown needed money. If the crown wanted to punish people who spoke out against the crown, and on and on and on. They would use an attack on their private property. to shut them up or destroy them. That's why private property rights were so crucial when this nation was founded, among other reasons. Your private property, your home, your cars, whatever. What does that represent? Just some theory about capitalism? No, much more than that. What does capitalism represent? They represent this, America. How many of you work for a living? How many of you have worked but are now retired? Did you get up in the morning and go to work and come back at night? Did you do it 5 days a week? Did you work one job, two jobs? Did you spend 20, 30, 40 years on the job? It represents your freedom. That is, your application of your time on earth. Physical and intellectual application of your humanity, of your time on earth towards the production of something for which you are compensated. It's a unique skill or not a unique skill. We only have a limited amount of time on this earth. That's why James Madison talked about private property more broadly than actual physical, tangible property. He said you have private property in your being, in your existence. And what he meant by that is people do not have the right to impose illegitimate demands on you. Government does not have that right. So when you work hard and you purchase a home and you pay a mortgage every month, that represents your freedom, your liberty. That represents your humanity. Nobody gave it to you. You did this with your time, with your sweat, with your blood, with your tears, with your sacrifice and your family sacrifice, day in and day out. You did this. So when some potentate, whether it's a king or an attorney general in New York, steps in and says, I'm taking it from you, under the mirage or cover of a never-used statute, in front of a radical judge, both elected Democrats. The attorney general said she was going to get Trump, and she uses this statute. That is an attack on your liberty. It is an attack on your humanity. That's not about doing justice. That's the opposite. Remember what we talked about, Bastiat, last night? That is using the law to commit a crime against an individual and their property rights and their freedom. And then self-righteously claim that you're enforcing the law. When you're committing a crime that is camouflaged by the law and your use of the law. That's why there's an Eighth Amendment to the Constitution. Because the men who wrote the Constitution and later the Bill of Rights were well aware of what happened in Britain. They're well aware of what happens with a centralized power. The Eighth Amendment's rarely talked about for a lot of reasons. Among the most important is that the media, academia, law professors, most of whom are socialist/Marxist, only want you to be aware of it. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Now, they've used the Eighth Amendment to try and protect people on death row, particularly if they're younger and so forth, excessive punishments. But in 2018, a case was brought by a man who had some drug paraphernalia in his Land Rover. The drugs and the drug paraphernalia amounted to about $1,200. So what happened was he was punished. It was brought to court. But they confiscated his Range Rover, which was worth $42,000. They, effectively the state, the town. And this occurred in Indiana. And so it's called the Timbs case, Timbs. The opinion was issued in 2019. He brought the case in 2018. So it's a very recent Supreme Court case, United States. So the district court agreed that that part of the penalty was excessive under the Eighth Amendment. The appellate court in Indiana agreed that that part of the Eighth Amendment was excessive. The Supreme Court of Indiana said, no, it's not excessive, and by the way, the Eighth Amendment doesn't even apply. It's a federal matter. The Bill of Rights, it's a federal matter. It's not incorporated to apply to the states under the 14th Amendment. Now, as a footnote, when you look at the Bill of Rights, the first 8, the 9th and 10th part, have nothing to do with the states. It's all about protecting you from this new national government. But over the course of many decades, the Supreme Court has slowly applied, incorporated, it's called incorporation doctrine. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, to the states. But what about the Eighth? What about cruel and unusual punishments inflicted? What about excessive fines imposed in particular? The Supreme Court ruled that the taking of Mr. Tim's Range Rover, in addition to the other penalties, over a $1,200 criminal act, was an excessive fine under the Eighth Amendment. It ruled further. The Eighth Amendment does, in fact, apply to the states by way of the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause, and that's what they use to incorporate the other parts of the Bill of Rights, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Therefore, and if you read the 14th Amendment, you see a lot of the Fifth Amendment. Therefore, the court ruled 9-0 with two, not objectors, but two additional opinions by Justices Gorsuch and Thomas. But in the end, it was 9-0 that was excessive, and in fact, the Eighth Amendment does apply in this regard to the states. It's always applied in terms of the imprisonment and so forth. But in this regard, excessive fines imposed, it also applies to the states. That was the ruling in 2019. When President Trump was interviewed the other night, a great interview, I thought. He did a fantastic job. He raised the Eighth Amendment, and the response was, but that's a state issue, this issue of fines and penalties. But under the Timbs decision in 2019, it's not merely a state issue. In fact, the Eighth Amendment, in terms of excessive fines and penalties, does apply to states. Now, I want to go a step further. Yes, this is a constitutional law class, but it's in plain English. But I want you to learn more about this because it's very, very important, and I'm hoping the president's lawyers pursue this. After I posted the article from my friend Arthur, President Trump retweeted it, and he also had tweeted a text of the language of the Eighth Amendment.